What are some new mixing mistakes that most new mixers fall into that you should avoid? My name is Andrew Aurora and I help artists and producers bring their creative vision to life, and I put out a video like this every single week. So if you enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that notifications bell so that way you never miss a video. And today I want to talk about 20 things that all new mixers should avoid. So let's jump right into the first one. The first new mistake that most beginner mixers make is not establishing a workflow. When you're first starting out, you're trying to figure out, how to make things sound good, how to EQ, how to compress, how to route, how to do this, how to do that. And sometimes you're not really that focused on establishing a workflow. But the sooner that you can establish a workflow and an approach that works for pretty much every song, an approach where you can consistently reproduce this every time you tackle a song, the sooner you will be able to start laying down a strong foundation for yourself and start building off that foundation and expanding your knowledge. Until then, you're going to be kind of flying blindly and getting distracted by a million different little things, trying to figure out what you should do and how you should do it. And the best way to do this is to start building a template that allows you to have your favorite plugin set up, your favorite routing set up, your favorite track set up, and everything set up in such a way that you know exactly what you're doing every single time you put a song into your template. Start establishing how you like to work and repeat that every time. I'm not saying don't ever experiment, but start really building a foundation where you can start experimenting and trying some new things and eventually figure out exactly how you like to work, and it will save you so much time and make you so much better of a mixer. The next big noob mixing mistake is having no organization. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the last tip, because templates will definitely help you stay organized, but not having things named properly, labeled properly, color coded properly, and just kind of having things scattered across your entire session is definitely going to make your workflow be compromised and going to make your life a lot harder. And this is just a recipe for disaster. So it's super important to make sure that you have everything color coded in a way that works for you. I mean, if you don't like colors, you don't have to use colors as long as you can stay organized, but also have everything named properly in a way where you just know what you're working with, know what you're doing. And also on top of that, make sure that you have all your files organized. Make sure that you have all your sessions organized in such a way where you can find everything, especially for recall, especially if you're working with clients, because if they come back to you and they want something changed, something tweaked, you want to be able to find things even if it was done 1 or 2 years ago. You want to be able to easily find stuff. And on top of that, make sure that you have everything saved in 3 places. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. You don't want to have an issue where you only have it saved on your computer and then your computer goes bad, or you only had it saved on an external hard drive and the hard drive gets stolen or goes bad. You want to make sure that you have it in at least 3 places. And I personally recommend at least your computer, maybe an external hard drive, and definitely at least one on a cloud. This was a lesson that I learned in college from my professor, who said if it's not in 3 places, it doesn't exist, and that is very true. So be sure to have everything saved in at least 3 places and well organized where you can find it later.
Now, real quick, I wanted to interrupt this video to mention my free resource, The Essentials Guide to Becoming a Beast at Mixing and Mastering. This free resource includes a step-by-step mixing guide, a list of what I feel are the most important things for you to focus on to become a beast at mixing and mastering, my favorite mixing and mastering tips, and my favorite resources such as my favorite books and favorite ear training programs to help you develop a strong foundation for yourself on your mixing and mastering journey. And if you want to pick this up, you can do so by clicking the link in the description of this video. And of course, if you'd like a chance to work with me, there's also a link in the description to apply to work with me as well. Now on to the rest of the video.
The next big noob mixing mistake is ignoring your mids. So I'm gonna be honest, I did this one for a little bit. I ignored my mids, and we all do it, right? We've all done it at some point because the top end sounds so nice. That's where you get your air and your clarity. And the low end sounds nice because that's where you get your thump and your punch and your fullness and your fatness. But where you really get a lot of the life and the energy of your mix is in the mid range and a lot of your clarity. If you ignore your mid range, you're definitely gonna have a rookie sounding mix, and people are definitely gonna be able to notice. If you don't give good attention to your mid-range, then you are not going to be sounding like a professional mixer, that is for sure. It's also very easy to neglect your mids when mixing in solo because it sounds really good to boost those highs and boost those lows, but in the context of the rest of the mix, a lot of the time you can really lose that element if you cut out all the mid-range. Now obviously every element of the song is different and you really just got to use your ears, but be sure to give those mids some love so you can have some great sounding mixes. The next thing that many Noob mixers don't do is they don't use automation. So without automation, your mixes can sound very static and very boring, and you need to think of automation kind of like the icing on the cake. Once your mix is pretty dialed in, you can start focusing on automation to really breathe some life into your mix. Now, not every mix needs a lot of automation, but most mixes will benefit from at least some automation. So how can you use automation? Well, you can use automation by bringing up the volume in certain parts of the song, so that way you can make certain things pop in certain sections. You can also use automation on like an EQ, so when it goes to the chorus, maybe you can brighten up the vocals just a little bit more so they pop a little bit more in the hook. You can automate reverbs and delays, so that way maybe at the end of a vocal part, you hear the delay echo a little bit louder on certain parts. You can use automation for all sorts of different things in your mix to really, breathe life into it and to tame certain things that you're dealing with throughout your mix. But of course, learning when to automate and what kind of automation to use will take practice and it will take time. It's not something you need to stress super heavy about when you're first starting out, but definitely try to experiment and start asking yourself, could I automate this or automate that to make things a little bit more interesting or make things a little better? The next big mistake that I see Noob mixers making is mixing in the production stage. So when you're producing, it does require a little bit of mixing, right? To get everything kind of dialed in the way you want it and getting everything to sound kind of the way you want it and all the elements to sound, how you like. But that being said, you should not be worrying about mixing the song while you're producing. And the reason for this is that you are going to be getting distracted and going from mixing to production to editing, and you're not going to have your mind completely focused on mixing. And what you need to do is you need to commit to your edits, commit to your production, and you need to set up a designated mixing session that is specifically for mixing, so that way your mind can focus specifically on the mixing process, and that way you're going to get much better mixes instead of getting distracted by your production and your editing, and you'll be able to focus exclusively on mixing. The next big Noob mixing mistake that I have for you is not making sure that the sample rate of your tracks and the sample rate of your session match. So what will happen if they don't match is a lot of the time the song will sound like it's down pitched or up pitched or sped up or slowed down. And I have had this happen many times. I'll be honest, I'm guilty of doing this with clients where they send me a song and I've never heard the song before. So when I put it into my session, I think it sounds, the way that it should. And I go and I mix it and it sounds great and I send it back to them, and then they say something like it sounds down pitched or it sounds weird or it sounds slowed down or something like that. And I immediately know what I did wrong. I forgot to check the sample rate of the tracks and make sure they matched the sample rate of my session. Then I have to pretty much go back and somewhat remix the whole song again, which is never fun. And what you need to do is you need to match the sample rate of the session to the tracks, not the other way around, because it's going to be more destructive to the tracks to change their sample rate than it's going to be if you change the session sample rate to the track sample rate. The next big Noob mixing mistake is not giving yourself an ear break. So if you've been mixing for a little bit, then your ears are going to start playing tricks on you. And if you don't believe me, then have you ever been tweaking a plugin and thought to yourself, wow, this sounds so much better, it sounds great, and then you notice the plugin was off? Yeah, me too. And my recommendation is if you've been working for maybe 30 to 60 minutes, go take maybe about a 10 to 15 minute ear break, go grab a drink, go on a walk, grab a snack, do something, but let your ears have a little break and then come back to the session, and I guarantee you 9 times out of 10 that you will hear things a little bit differently, and you'll notice that certain things need to be changed, and you'll wonder how you never heard them before. It's because your ears were tired and they needed a reset. So give yourself ear breaks. The next Noob mixing mistake is too much reverb. So, it's very easy to do this, especially when you're starting out, because when you hear reverb, it sounds fantastic and you just want to add a bunch of it. And trust me, I understand, but this is a very clear sign of a noob mixer, is when there's way too much reverb. If you have too much reverb, things are going to sound washed out, it's going to sound muddy, things aren't going to be as clear as they should be, and you just want to make sure that you don't have too much reverb. It's going to take a little bit of time to figure out, what is too much, what is too little, but definitely try not to have too much reverb on your mixes. The next Noob mixing mistake is using too many different reverbs. So what can happen with too many different reverbs is, instead of everything sounding like it's in the same space, a lot of the time it can make everything sound like it's in different spaces and the whole mix sound very disconnected. Now don't get me wrong, sometimes using different reverbs definitely sounds pretty good and can add an interesting interesting element to the song. However, I would not go overboard with too many reverbs. In fact, for me personally, in most of my songs, I tend to do anywhere from maybe 2 to 3 different reverbs. It kind of depends on the song though, but definitely just try not to go too crazy with having like a different reverb on the snare and different reverb on the toms and different reverb on the vocals or whatever. Just try to have everything, you know, under control. Now obviously there's not set in stone rules. Whatever sounds good, right? But I think more often than not, too many reverbs sounds not great as opposed to great. The next Noob mixing mistake is mixing too much in solo. So we've all heard it. I know a bunch of people on YouTube say this all the time. Don't mix in solo too much. But the reason everybody says it is because it's true, and it's very easy when you're a new mixer to mix in solo all the time. The thing is you are the only person that's ever going to hear those elements of the song in solo. Everyone else that ever hears a song is going to hear the song all together, and what matters the most is how the song sounds together, not how each individual element sounds in solo. Solo can be a great tool to really hone in on something, but it can also be a great way for you to hear things that really aren't a problem and think they're a problem, and then start changing stuff and then find out that, you know, it doesn't sound good when brought in with the rest of the mix. So try not to mix too much in solo. The next big noob mixing mistake is analysis paralysis. So many noobs, what they do is they want to, you know, indulge in as much information as possible. They want to watch as many YouTube videos as possible. They want to read as many books as possible before ever actually taking action. And this is a huge mistake because, like most things in life, you are going to learn more from doing than from constantly taking in new information. What you should be doing is taking in some new information, then applying it, then taking in some more new information and then applying it. Otherwise, you are going to constantly be stuck in analysis paralysis. And I understand why people do this. They want to, you know, learn everything before taking action so that way they don't make mistakes. But the reality is you're going to learn a lot more from making mistakes than from getting everything right all the time. So don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Continue to learn, continue to, you know, fill your mind with more information, but continue to apply the new lessons that you're learning and don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. The next thing that a lot of noobs do is they waste money on gear they don't need. Now, don't get me wrong, I like fancy plugins. We all like fancy gear and fancy plugins, right? But at the same time, if you're not very good at what you're doing, buying new gear and new plugins is not going to magically make you better. What you need to do is get good with the tools that you already have. If you are going to invest money in new tools and new gear, let it be stuff that's actually going to improve your workflow and make your life easier. For example, one of my favorite plugins is the Metric AB plugin, but it's not really a mixing tool, it's a referencing tool. And without this tool, it's really hard to reference mixes in an intuitive way. And to me, that was definitely worth the money and made my life a lot easier. But what you should be doing instead of investing in 10 new EQs is you need to really learn the tools that you have and then continue to, you know, add more stuff on top of that later. Don't think that you need new gear to get better. All that said, if you are going to invest some money in some gear, my recommendation is to invest in things like headphones, a better computer, speakers, a better interface, a better monitor for more screen real estate, an external mouse and an external keyboard to speed up your workflow. Things like that are definitely where you should be putting your money more so than more compressors or more plugins or hardware. The next mistake that a lot of noobs make when they start mixing is leaving the analog button on their Waves plugins. So if you've been mixing for quite some time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This stupid button just adds noise to the sound, and honestly, I think Waves just put it there to troll noobs. It literally doesn't make the sound better, it just adds unnecessary noise, so don't turn on the analog button on your Waves plugins. The next big noob mixing mistake is over-mixing. So a lot of mixers, what they'll do when they're starting out is they'll get a good mix, and then they will just start tweaking it until they are just over-mixing at that point. Trust me, the mix didn't get any better when you added 0.5 dB at 5K on that kick drum, or added an extra 5% of reverb on those vocals. It really didn't make that much of a difference. And a perfectionist absolutely struggles with this because they will continue to just tweak and tweak and tweak the mix until eventually they just ruin it. A professional will learn when the mix is done, and honestly this is much easier when you actually have a client that you're mixing for, because the mix won't be done until they say it's done. You see, with a client you may get the mix pretty close, but there will come a point where you have to send it to them and get their feedback to know how close to done it actually is. Nothing is worse than spending like 2 hours getting that perfect snare sound just to send it to the client and them say, "I hate the snare drum." At that point, you've wasted so much time trying to get that perfect tone, and the client didn't even like it. Just get the mix solid and send it to the client so that way they can tell you what they don't like. And trust me, no matter how good the mix is, 99% of the time, the client is going to want to at least change something about the mix. The next mistake that a lot of noob mixers make is they take way too long on their mix. Now this goes kind of hand in hand with the last tip that I mentioned, but quit taking forever on your mix. Don't get me wrong, I understand when you're starting out, it's probably gonna take you a week or so to mix a song. I get it, you're probably not gonna be finishing a song in 1 or 2 hours, but learn when to identify when a song is about as good as you can get it and move on to the next song. Taking forever on one song is not what's gonna make you a better mixer. Mixing more songs is what's going to make you a better mixer. And I fully understand, when I first started out, it used to take me well over a month to mix one song. I would just continue to tweak it and dial it in, and it would just never sound right. But ultimately what made me better was deepening my education as well as mixing more songs. That's what you need to do to get better, so just don't take forever on one mix, just move on. The next mistake that a lot of noob mixers make is not understanding what genre they're working in. So every genre is different, and I used to deal with this a lot in live sound, right? We were working a lot with country bands because, you know, this is Nashville, right? And I had coworkers that loved metal music, and they would sit here and boost like a bunch of 5K on a kick drum to get that clicky metal kick sound. And I would always look at them and say, you know what, I love metal, but this isn't metal. It's not supposed to sound like metal. Understand what genre you're working in. Understand if it's a faster or a slower genre, if it's a heavier genre or a softer genre. Understand if it's a little bit more organic and needs, you know, less samples or more samples. Understand what you're doing with the music that you're working with. Understand the genre, because if you are going to be mixing more than one genre in your career, you cannot be a one-trick pony. You need to be able to adapt to different genres. The next mistake that I see noob mixers making is relying on mastering to fix their mixes. So just like you are not going to rely on mixing to fix poor production, you are not going to rely on mastering to fix poor mixes. You see, I talk a lot about mixing into a mastering chain and top-down mixing, but this is more of an advanced style of mixing, and I do not recommend it for beginners. I recommend, if you are a beginner, not mixing into a mastering chain at all, or maybe just mixing into a compressor. Do not rely on a mastering chain or a mastering engineer to fix your crappy mixes. Have the mentality that you are going to get the best mix possible, and you are going to deliver the mastering engineer the best possible quality that they could possibly receive, where they have to do as little work as possible and it just sounds fantastic before they even get it. Basically, the goal is you want it to sound as close to a master track while it's being mixed without even mastering it before you ever send it to a mastering engineer or before you master it yourself. If you get a little bit more experience, you can start experimenting with top-down mixing like I do and mixing into a mastering chain. But again, this is for beginners, and I don't recommend that for beginners because you will oftentimes be fighting yourself. Just focus on getting the best mix possible and don't rely on mastering to fix your crappy mixes. So another mistake that many noob mixers make is they don't get their panning correct. So all of us are trying to get wider mixes, trying to figure out little tricks and cool things that we can do to get wider mixes, but sometimes it's just as simple as getting your panning correct. So many mixers out there just do hard left, hard right, and dead center for their panning, and others experiment. Me personally, I definitely think it depends on the song. I think sometimes if you have too many elements panned hard left and hard right, sometimes they'll start fighting for space, and it does make sense to pan them a little bit more in, but a lot of famous mixers out there only do hard left, hard right, and center, and for the most part, that's what I do too, unless I really feel like it makes sense to pan something, you know, kind of in between center and right or center and left. For example, the toms, I don't tend to pan them hard left and right because I want them to kind of sound like they are in the same place that they would be on a drum kit, but most things I do pan hard left, hard right, and center. And I of course never think it is a good idea to have a bunch of random panning throughout your session, like one element panned at, you know, 32, another element panned at 87, another element panned at 43, like that's pretty much never a good idea. That's one of those things where it's like, I'm not gonna say it's a rule, but like it 99% of the time makes your mix sound like crap. So my recommendation is, for the most part, stick with hard left, hard right, and center. And if you really feel like, you need to pan between those, then, experiment and see what you think. Just use your ears at the end of the day. So another mistake that I see a lot of new mixers make is being afraid to make big moves. So for example, a lot of people when they're starting out, they're afraid to boost 10 dB on an EQ or compress by 10 decibels on a compressor. And at the end of the day, I think it's important to remember that if it sounds good, it is good. And in fact, some plugins even sound better if you push them harder. For example, the CLA76, one of my favorite compressors, in my opinion, sounds better when you compress a little bit harder, around 7 dB. Or one of my favorite EQ plugins, the SSL channel strip from Waves, in my opinion, sounds really good when you boost a lot of EQ on it. For example, sometimes I'll boost like 8 dB of 200 hertz on a snare, and then like another 5 to 8 dB at 5K on a snare. Why? Because it sounds good. But then other compressors like the LA2A, in my opinion, sound a little bit too pumpy when you compress like 7 dB. And then the Cubase standard EQ on all the channels that come stock with it, to me that EQ sounds way too aggressive if you sit here and you cut like 10 dB out of it, unless that's what you want. If that's the sound you want, that's fine. But when you cut or boost a bunch of EQ on that, it sounds very aggressive, and it can sound even like overboard. So every EQ and every compressor is different, but don't be afraid to make big moves. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes a lot of new mixers make, and I even made it myself. Point is, don't be afraid to experiment and see what sounds good, but don't think that too much compression or too much EQ is bad, because it is not. So those were my 20 Noob mixing mistakes to avoid. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like on the video, and of course leave a comment if you have any questions, and share this video with someone who can gain some value from it, and I will see you guys next week. Peace.